Nevertheless, Amy continued to argue that violence was imminent if free men of color were not given their rights. Although Barnave finally succumbed to Amy, the tension in Saint-Dominique was already too high. During the first few years of the French Revolution, slaves throughout the French Caribbean colonies organized insurrections. The islanders heard the agitation for independence from white European planters and knew that if independence were granted, their slavery would only be that much harsher. Even more inflammatory were rumors of decreed emancipation that circulated, leading the slaves to assume officials were simply ignoring the laws. The blacks of Saint-Dominique began actively pursuing their rights.
Well, in 1790, a mulatto named Vincent Oge demanded suffrage and elections for all free men of color in Saint-Domingue. After the whites rejected his request, there was actually an uprising of mulattoes, and it was swiftly put down, and Oge was executed. In France, the government refused to interfere with the status of slaves or the slave trade in the colonies, which was a controversial decision because there was continually a growing amount of rhetoric and ideas against slavery in France. Even as tensions in France steadily mounted, the agitations in the colonies continued to intensify. Heavily influenced by the threat from the Amy and the continued uprisings in the colonies, the French government ruled on May 5th, 1791, that all financially qualified men of color could become enfranchised and actual citizens of Saint-Domingue. The battle was not even close to won at that point, though, because so many of the whites refused to enact the law in Saint-Domingue, which led to increasing tensions between whites and blacks on the island.
Not surprisingly, on August 22, 1791, rebellion broke out on Saint-Dominique. Slaves plunged the colony into civil war. A planned attack by 400,000 blacks, led by Toussaint Louverture, eventually resulted in the overthrow of French overlords and the creation of a Black Republic. This rebellion was the first revolt in a Caribbean plantation to successfully overthrow white power.
Many French viewed Saint-Domingue's slave revolts as evidence of the blacks' inability to govern themselves, and they went as far to claim that slaves were ruining the economy. This changed on April 4th, 1792, when free men of color became politically and civically equal through legislation approved by the new French Legislative Assembly. Even though it was approved in France, didn't really mean it would be followed through on the island, so France sent 6,000 Frenchmen to the island to stop this revolt and make sure colonial assemblies were re-elected under the new suffrage law. Still, violent outbreaks continued throughout the islands. Anarchy reigned. It got to the point where the French government barely had any influence.
The French government needed to act quickly, and it finally did on February 4th, 1794, by approving the Universal Emancipation Decree, which freed all colonial slaves. This Emancipation Declaration abolished slavery and granted civil and political rights to all black men in the colonies. However, a new power was on the rise, one that would effectively terminate every policy that set the slaves free. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon seized power in France in 1796 and was set on creating a French empire the likes of which the world had never seen. His first step was to rebuild the crippled French economy, and the quickest way to do that was with overseas trade starting in the Caribbean. Napoleon encountered the same problems the early colonists did: a high demand for sugar, but no labor force large enough to produce it. To address the problem, Napoleon ordered a re-establishment of colonial slavery and slave trade with an official decree on May 20th, 1802.